There comes a moment in a woman's life when the noise inside finally goes quiet, and most women mistake that silence for something ending. It is not. Something is beginning, but it begins so softly that you could miss it entirely if you were still listening for the old signals. Picture a kitchen at 6 in the morning. Steam rises from a cup of coffee that nobody is waiting to share. A woman stands by the window, and for the first time in perhaps 20 years, she is not running a quiet calculation in the back of her mind about whether someone will call, whether someone will stay, whether someone will see her today. Carl Gustav Jung, working in his consulting room in Kusterland during the long Swiss winters of the 1920s, encountered this silence again and again in the women who came to him. Most of them arrived believing they were broken. They were not. What they had mistaken for a wound was, in fact, the early architecture of a transformation that the old languages of love had never prepared them to recognize. Let me tell you what Jung saw, because what he saw might be the precise thing some part of you has been trying to understand for years. He noticed that a certain kind of woman, after enough heartbreak, after enough relationships that all somehow rhymed with the first one, would arrive at a strange threshold. On one side of that threshold, she searched. On the other side, she stopped searching, and almost immediately life began to arrange itself around her with a tenderness she had previously begged for in vain. This was not luck. This was not the universe rewarding her patience. Jung suspected something far more interesting and far more uncomfortable to admit. He suspected that the woman herself had changed at a level so deep that the world simply responded to a new frequency she was emitting without knowing she was emitting it. Think about a woman you may have known, or perhaps a woman you have been. She is intelligent and warm. She gives easily. And yet, beneath everything, there lives a quiet hunger that no relationship ever quite satisfies. A hunger she sometimes interprets as a need for the right partner, sometimes as a flaw in her own worthiness, sometimes as proof that love itself is broken. Jung would have listened to her for a long while before speaking. And when he spoke, he might have said something that sounds almost cruel at first, until you sit with it for a few weeks. He might have said that she is not, in truth, searching for a man at all. What she is searching for, without realizing it, is a buried part of herself that she has been outsourcing for as long as she can remember. Inside every woman, Jung observed, there lives an inner figure he called the animus. Think of him not as a person, but as an energy. The energy of decision, of structure, of the word that cuts cleanly through fog. The capacity to stand on your own ground and say, this is mine, that is not. Every woman carries this energy from birth. Cultures, however, do strange things with it. Some bury it under generations of politeness. Some shame it into hiding. Some teach a little girl, very early, that her safety depends on someone else carrying her structure for her. And so the energy goes underground. What happens next is the quiet tragedy that Jung described with surgical clarity. A woman who has not yet inhabited her own inner masculine spends years, sometimes decades, looking for it in the men she meets. She does not know that this is what she is doing. She experiences it as falling in love, as longing, as hope, as the conviction that this one, finally, might be the one. But underneath, an older mechanism is at work. She is trying to recover, through another person, a piece of herself she set down so long ago she no longer remembers leaving it there. Have you ever wondered why certain relationships exhaust you in a way that has nothing to do with how much you love the other person? It is rarely because the other person is cruel. More often, it is because you are asking them to carry something that was never theirs to carry. The grounding, the certainty, the sense of being held inside your own life. Whenever a woman expects from the outside what can only be built on the inside, she enters, without intending to, a form of subtle dependence that has very little to do with real love. Some nights, she wakes at 3 in the morning with an intuition she cannot quite name, a whisper from somewhere deeper than thought, suggesting that what she is looking for is not where she has been looking. Jung often returned to a particular image when describing the psyche. He spoke of a deep lake. On the surface, you find what we usually call personality, the roles, the masks, the stories we tell at dinner parties. Beneath that surface, however, lie currents and shapes moving in the dark. The animus lives down there. And while he remains unmet, he runs the show from below. He chooses our partners for us. He pulls us toward the men who carry our missing pieces, or worse, toward those who reenact the original wound we never let ourselves examine. Maybe you have noticed something like this in your own history. Different names, different faces, different cities even. And yet, when you look back honestly, the same essential story replays itself with a precision that almost feels designed. This is not a curse. This is not bad luck in love. It is, as Jung would say, the unconscious speaking. And the unconscious will keep speaking until somebody finally sits down to listen. If these words are landing somewhere real in you, if some quiet part of you is leaning forward as you read this, you might consider subscribing to this channel. Not out of habit, not out of obligation, but so that these reflections can find their way back to you in the moments when you need them, like a small lamp left burning in a hallway for the version of yourself that has not yet arrived. Now return for a moment to the woman in the kitchen. 42 years old, perhaps, or 53. The age matters less than the moment, because the moment can arrive at any age. One day, almost imperceptibly, she begins to notice that she is making decisions without first running them past an imaginary audience. She notices that she enjoys dinners alone. She notices that her body relaxes when she comes home, instead of tightening in anticipation of disappointment. Something has shifted, and she has no language for it yet. What is shifting is the integration Jung described. Bringing the animus home is not about becoming hard. It is not about imitating men, or armoring yourself against tenderness, or treating love as a weakness to be outgrown. It is something far more delicate than that. It is the slow act of reclaiming an energy you had unconsciously rented out to the world. You learn to stand for yourself. You learn to draw a line without apologizing for the line. You learn that the word no can be spoken without guilt, and that the word yes can be offered without losing yourself in the offering. Jung once compared this work to becoming both the tree and the root at the same time. You no longer need another tree to lean against in order to keep standing. And here, exactly here, the strangest paradox in all of relational psychology begins to reveal itself. The very moment a woman stops searching for love, love begins, quietly and inexplicably, to search for her. This is not mysticism. There is a precise psychological mechanism underneath it, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. A woman who is waiting for love emits, without ever choosing to, a signal of lack. The signal is not a flaw, it is simply a fact of psychic reality. Other people perceive it within seconds of meeting her, although they will rarely be able to articulate what they are perceiving. That signal attracts two kinds of people. First, those who need to be saviors, who will rush in to fill the space and then, exhausted, retreat once the rescue has lost its glamour. Second, and more painfully, those who recognize the lack and quietly arrange their lives to feed on it, occupying the space without ever filling it. Either way, what gets built is not a real meeting. It is a transaction wearing the costume of love. A woman who has come home to her own inner masculine no longer broadcasts that signal. What she broadcasts instead is something else entirely, a density, a composure. A kind of quiet that does not require an audience. This presence is magnetic, but not in the loud, glittery sense of the word. It is magnetic in the way a still lake is magnetic at dawn, drawing the whole sky down into itself without effort. Because she is not asking to be filled, she offers, for perhaps the first time in her life, the possibility of an actual encounter. Not two halves clinging to each other in mutual hunger, but two whole beings recognizing one another across a quiet distance. Jung once said something that has stayed with me for years. He suggested that real love is not the meeting of two halves, but the meeting of two wholes. The old romantic myth of the missing piece, of the soulmate who completes you, of the other who will finally make you feel whole, is precisely what prevents real love from arriving. As long as you experience yourself as a half, you will keep finding halves. And two halves pressed together do not form a whole. They form a knot, a tangled architecture of expectations and projections that eventually, inevitably, unravels. Imagine now a different woman, 53, perhaps, a life with chapters. She has loved men who did not know how to love her back. She has raised children, buried parents, watched friendships end and others begin. One ordinary morning, somewhere between the first sip of coffee and the second, she realizes that the weight of waiting is no longer in her chest. When did this happen, she wonders. The truth is, it happened in layers, like snow settling on a roof without sound, until one day the shape of everything had simply changed. She has become, without quite intending it, a woman who no longer needs to be chosen in order to exist. And it is precisely from this point onward that her life begins to take on a beauty she could not have manufactured if she had tried. This beauty has a name in Jung's work. He called it individuation, the process by which a person becomes, fully and unrepentantly, who they actually are, not a role, not a function, not a curated identity assembled to please others, a whole being with the masculine and the feminine reconciled, the light and the shadow met, the parts that act and the parts that receive finally in conversation with one another. This work, Jung believed, is the great task of the second half of life. And he observed, sometimes with an emotion he did not bother to hide, that women who walked this path developed a quality of presence that no single word could capture. Sit with this for a moment, because it can be disorienting at first. What it means is that everything you have ever reached for on the outside, every reassurance, every promise, every form of recognition you waited for from another person, was always also living inside of you. Not as a consolation prize, not as a substitute for love because love did not come, but as a deeper truth. Real love is not something you find. Real love is something you become. Read that line one more time, slowly. Let it settle, because inside it there is a quiet revolution. While you are searching for love, you are still trying to fill something. When you stop searching, it does not mean you have given up. It means you have become, at last, a place where love can actually arrive. Do not confuse this with closing yourself off. Letting go of waiting is not the same as renouncing love. It is not bitterness. It is not the cynical hardness of a woman who has been hurt too many times to try again. It is, on the contrary, a softer kind of strength. Love becomes a choice rather than a need, a meeting rather than a rescue, a joy that adds to a life that was already full, rather than a missing organ in a body that could not function without it. Think of the women you have known who seemed whole in a way you could not quite explain. They were not necessarily the youngest, nor the most conventionally striking. What they had was something in the eyes, a steadiness, an absence of that low-level anxiety that so often hums beneath the surface of women who are still waiting. You wanted to be near them without entirely understanding why. Those women had crossed the threshold Jung was trying to describe. They had come home to themselves. and their presence, almost without their knowing, reminded everyone around them of something everyone had quietly forgotten. Here is an image that has stayed with me. A high mountain lake at first light, no wind, not a ripple on the surface. The water is so still that the sky has come down to live inside it. The mountains, the clouds, the trees, all of them held perfectly in the calm. The lake did nothing to arrange this. It did not run after the sky. It did not bargain with the mountains. It became simply deep enough and still enough and itself enough that the world wanted to rest there. A woman who has integrated her animus is that lake, and everything that comes to her comes because she has become a place where things can finally come to rest. None of this means that pain has been abolished. None of this means doubt never returns. Old fears still knock at the door sometimes, particularly at night, but the center of gravity has moved. It is no longer hanging out in someone else's hands, waiting to be confirmed or denied. It lives inside the chest now, quiet and dense and yours. A woman with an interior center of gravity can pass through almost any storm without losing herself in it. Jung, near the end of his life, wrote about a transformation he had witnessed in certain patients that he described almost reverently. These women, he said, no longer sought love the way they once had. They sought instead to love well, to stand inside an affection that did not diminish them, to choose rather than to plead, to stay rather than to cling. And he noted, with a kind of muted wonder, that the men who began to appear around such women were not at all the same men they had attracted before, as if the inner shift had quietly rearranged the entire outer landscape. This is not magic. This is depth psychology, doing precisely what it has always done. When you stop asking another person to deliver what only you can build, you stop attracting those who feed on your unbuilt places. And for the first time, you become visible to those who are looking, not for a project, not for a savior, but for a meeting. There may be, even now as you read this, a part of you that has known all of this for a long time. A part that has whispered to you, in the silence of certain late hours, that the path was never outside. That part is the one to listen to, not in order to become someone else, but to become, more fully, who you already are, underneath all the waiting. Jung once wrote that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Inside that one sentence sits the whole quiet program of an interior life worth living. If these reflections have walked with you, if something in you has recognized a voice it had been waiting to hear, you might consider subscribing, not to follow me, but so that these explorations can continue to find their way to you in the moments when they will matter most. Like a letter discovered in a drawer years later, saying exactly the thing you needed to hear, on the day you finally needed to hear it. I want to leave you with one last image. A woman by a window at dusk. She is not crying. She is not waiting for the phone to ring. She is not measuring the silence for signs of abandonment. She is simply there, present to herself, and the late light enters the room as though she had personally invited it. This woman has not given up on love. She has moved it. She has placed it at the center of her own life, where it can no longer be taken from her. And whatever comes to her now will come because she has become, on the inside, spacious enough to hold it without dissolving. This, perhaps, is what Carl Jung was trying to leave behind for those who would come after him. That love is not at the end of the road. Love is what you become when you have made peace with every part of yourself. And a woman who no longer waits for love is not a woman who has stopped believing. She is a woman who has stopped searching for herself in other people. She has met herself, finally, in her own quiet country. And that meeting, you should know, is the first and the truest love story of all.